Fletcher. I'm a program. Oh, thank you, Joanna. Hi, everybody. Chris Fletcher. I'm a program director with the National Governors Association. And on behalf of NGA and AAAS and Resolve, very excited to welcome you to the first in our three-part webinar series discussing state approaches to PFAS contamination issues. Really excited to have you all here and to begin to showcase the excellent work that the Colorado team has done over the last few years and really look at ways that we at NGA and our partner organizations can support states going forward on technical assistance issues on PFAS or other contamination issues. Uh, Philosophically, NGA is all about supporting state solutions to complex problems. We really love to highlight the great work that you all are doing and really excited to partner with these organizations and states to look at the approaches that states are doing on this really complex and multifaceted problem. So really don't want to take much time, give the bulk of it to the Colorado team to discuss what's going on. But again, welcome, really excited to hear this. And I'll turn it over to my colleague Maya to walk through the agenda and get us ready to go. Maya, over to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Chris. And welcome everyone. Really glad to see so many different people from so many different states in the webinar today. So yeah, as Chris mentioned, my name is Maya Breitberg-Smith. I'm with an organization called Resolve, and I'll be helping to facilitate the webinar today and moderate the question and discussion time that we have. I'm here with my colleague, Erin Bongard, and together with the AAAS EPI Center and NGA, we facilitated the Colorado Action Planning Summit that we'll be talking about during the webinar today. And we've been working with NGA and the EPI Center and AAAS team for several years on these PFAS issues. So this webinar is one of a series of 3 webinars that we'll be doing, highlighting lessons learned and the results of policy planning summits that we've done in Colorado, in Ohio, and in Maryland. And so today's webinar is really focused on Colorado's action planning policy summit that happened in 2023. And it focused on, the summit was really focused on developing a PFAS state action plan, advancing public health protection and data-driven decision-making. And you'll hear a lot more about that during the presentation from Colorado. And Joanna, if you don't mind going to the next slide, I just wanted to say a little bit about the agenda for today's webinar. So you'll first hear from Rebecca Eicher, who's a project director with the American Association for the Advancement of Science, AAAS Center for Scientific Evidence in Public Issues, EPI Center, about the state policy planning summit approach and a little bit more about the work that they've been doing. We'll then turn to 3 people from the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, CDPHE, David Downey, Richard Murray, and Kelsey Schreiber, who will be talking about their process and PFAS action plan, process for developing and the contents of their PFAS action plan. Got about 25 minutes to hear from them, and then we will have time for questions and discussion. So during the webinar, during the presentations and afterwards, feel free to put questions into the chat. We'll also invite you to raise your hand and ask questions so we can have a good discussion in that last 15 minutes of the webinar. We'll then move to wrap up where we'll have a few questions for you. Just a few quick notes about Zoom. You should have gotten an announcement or heard a notice when you joined, but we are recording the webinar and we'll be sharing that recording after the webinar as a resource. Feel free to use the chat during the webinar if you have questions or comments. I always like to remind folks to pay attention to who you are sending your chat to and make sure things that are private say private and public say public. And then just a request to please stay on mute during the presentation, and when you're not speaking, just to reduce distractions. Should be all things we are well familiar with at this point now. Okay, I think that's about it for me in terms of opening comments and orientation to what we're planning to do today. So I'll go ahead and transition to Rebecca Eicher, who's a project director with the AAAS EPI Center, who will share a little bit more about the State Policy Planning Summit approach. Rebecca, over to you.
Great. Thanks, Maya. Welcome, and thanks to all of you for joining us for the first of these Policy Planning Summits discussions. We're thrilled to have all of you here, including our partners from the National Governors Association and our speakers from the Colorado Department of Public Health and the Environment. I'm really excited to hear from our colleagues in Colorado. And before we do, I just wanted to provide you with a bit of background about the EPI Center and context for these state policy planning summits. Next slide. So a bit about the EPI Center. Our mission is to build trusted relationships between scientists and policymakers at all levels of government to make it easier for decision makers to access and use scientific information and for scientists to engage with policymakers at scale. We work to bring clear, concise, and actionable scientific evidence to decision makers. And the AAAS and the EPI Center as part of AAAS is a nonpartisan, non-government organization. And the EPI Center has truly valued our ongoing partnership with NGA because it provides a really great opportunity to share with their many members in the many different states and territories. So next slide. We see science being key to addressing nearly all of the public policy issues that states, local governments, and federal agencies are faced with. And we work on a range of topics, PFAS being one of those topics. This is a slide to share some of those other topics. Today, we're really here to focus on PFAS, per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. This won't be an introduction to PFAS, so if you need some of that information, we do have it available and we can help get a better understanding around PFAS if you need more of an introduction, but today is really a deeper dive into state action planning. So a little bit about our approach. So we started working on PFAS back in 2019, and we developed materials that are really useful to provide an introduction to the science of PFAS, including their impacts on human health, sampling approaches, treatment options, and risk communication strategies. Once we developed those materials specifically for local and state decision makers, we began building relationships with PFAS scientific experts and policymakers at the local, state, and federal level. As we were doing that, we found that we could really host different types of virtual events, being public virtual events to invite-only roundtables with states looking to address specific issues, and worked with partner organizations like NGA and ECOS and ASTO, the Association of State and Territorial Health Officials, to really hone in on some of the specific areas that their members needed assistance on. And what we found was that through our partnership with NGA, we really had an opportunity to assist states in more of a deep dive on these PFAS policies and issues that an individual state is working on. So next slide. And I should say we have these materials available on our website, as well as many recordings of these public virtual learning events that we hosted around PFAS. And we can share our website again in case you need it. But this slide is really an opportunity to kind of highlight for you the evolution of our PFAS project. As we started, we were really listening with folks at the local and state level to try and understand where they had questions about PFAS and where the science could help them better understand how to address PFAS contamination. And then we worked in really around awareness building, helping states and local decision makers understand the science around PFAS, as well as what other states were doing to address PFAS. And so this timeline really just kind of helps highlight the many different things that we have done over the years with some of the external factors. With COVID, many folks were not able to focus on issues other than dealing with COVID, understandably. So we found that time to really start to build that awareness was important. And then once we were all able to kind of come back from that focus and start to think about some of these other issues, we were able to start to really dive into some of the other aspects of PFAS related to PFAS and CERCLA, PFAS and destruction technologies. And then once the US EPA set the first primary drinking water standards for 6 PFAS, we had an opportunity to share what they were doing, as well as start to think about how to support states in their deep dives on PFAS. I know you're desperate to hear from Colorado, so I've got one more slide to tell you a little bit about the process of the policy planning summits, and then I promise you'll get to hear from David, Kelsey, and Rich. So in partnership with the National Governors Association, we put out a request for proposals for states to identify what PFAS policy issues were most important in their state and what they were hoping to work on. And what these planning summits offer is an opportunity to bring together an interagency group of folks along with PFAS experts to address a state's particular questions around PFAS. Colorado was our first in this group of PFAS policy planning summits. And their proposal really showed a commitment to a data-driven, science-based approach toward decision-making and public health, as well as a comprehensive strategic set of ideas around how they might be able to address PFAS statewide. And so we really saw their application as what could be a model for other states developing action plans. And so we moved forward with working with Colorado for their statewide action plan. When we got into the planning, we worked really closely with a few staff members from the CDPHE, and we developed an interactive workshop style convening of interagency folks from Colorado, as well as PFAS experts, some from the state of Colorado and some from other parts of the country, and really provided an opportunity for the PFAS experts to help share about kind of the landscape around PFAS issues, as well as sharing what their states were doing to address different aspects of PFAS contamination, and kind of give some context to how Colorado was beginning to think about their priorities and their policies and efforts. And then we continued to, during the event, really support the discussion and the planning, which provided an opportunity for discussion, for presentations, and the opportunity to work through questions or challenges that different folks within Colorado could raise and talk through with their colleagues. And then we saw that Colorado went through a very public community engagement process in coming to finalize their PFAS action plan. So with that, I'll just share our contact information and remind you that if this seems like a model that you are interested in, or if there are resources that we might have, please do reach out to us and we are happy to be of assistance. So with that, I think Maya, you might come back and pass the microphone.
Yeah, thanks so much for that overview, Rebecca. And I know you mentioned you're going to share your contact information. And so you might want to just put that into the chat there if folks want to get in touch. And I know you'll share it again at the end of the meeting. Oh, there it is on the screen. Perfect. And one thing just to mention is that I just want to thank Rebecca and the AAAS EPI Center who got the grants that were able to support this the policy planning summits that happened. So thank you. So with that, I want to invite the Colorado team, Kelsey, David, and Rich on. I can see your cameras are on, and to invite you to come present and share a little bit more about the Colorado kind of context, action planning process, and some lessons learned. And Kelsey, David, and Rich are all from the Colorado Department of Public Health and the Environment, which is a unique structure. So I'll also invite them to share a little bit about that. And Joanna will share your slides. And David, Kelsey, and Rich, over to you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Maya. Yeah, we're very excited just for this opportunity to share with you all kind of what we went through and are working on with the support. And it's, I don't, it's through meetings like this that you find out just kind of what's possible. And then, you know, definitely if there's, you're thinking of doing something similar or just want to chat, just kind of more about anything that you see, please, yeah, reach out and we're happy to talk with you as well. And yeah, before we start, we are kind of uniquely set up. So our department combines both kind of the health programs along with the environmental programs. And so that's really allowed us to kind of work closely together since we're all just in the same building complex. And kind of each of us, Rich, Kelsey, and I kind of represent different areas kind of within the department and kind of keep moving, you know, helped create this action plan and then really helping to push it forward. And so we'll just do a quick introduction of who we are and then we'll get going. And so I'm David Danny, and I'm the Emerging Contaminants Coordinator over with our Water Quality Control Division. And I'll pass it off to Rich.
Thanks, David. Yeah, my name is Rich Murray. I'm the PFAS and Emerging Contaminants Coordinator within our Hazardous Materials and Waste Management Division. And I'll pass it off to Kelsey.
Hi, I'm Kelsey Schreiber. I am the Toxicology and Risk Assessment Unit Manager in our Division of Environmental Health and Sustainability.
Perfect. Next slide, please. So this is the, before you just tune out completely, this is the typical slide you see before any PFAS presentation. But what we wanted to highlight with it is really just the last bullet about rapidly evolving science, because this is what was key for us to think through when developing an action plan to address PFAS. So we're constantly learning and kind of readjusting as we learn about new sources of PFAS, various exposure pathways, as well as when the new health studies come out, and then we see kind of various levels of potential health concerns that just keep getting lower and lower. And so thinking through all that, you need a plan that has actions in it that are meaningful, but are also flexible and won't be obsolete in a year. So that's kind of the challenge, I think, when creating an action plan that addresses an emerging contaminant like PFAS. Next slide, please. Our first PFAS action plan was in 2019, and it focused on identifying and supporting communities with drinking water above EPA's health advisory, which at the time was 70 parts per trillion for both PFOA and PFOS. And at that time, the impacts we knew of were all from the use of firefighting foam containing PFAS. So the plan really had actions in it that only our department was taking. And after a while, we largely completed those actions. And then things just started changing with what we knew about PFAS and kind of where we needed to go. And in 2020, a state bill passed that created a PFAS cash fund. So this allowed us to do a lot more to understand and address PFAS in our state, such as setting up a grant program to support community testing, treatment, emergency assistance, as well as research. And we could create a buyback program for the firefighting foam containing these chemicals. So we found that most of the actions we were taking and then we're kind of needing to take based on the evolving science were just not reflected in this plan anymore. So even though it didn't have kind of an end date to it, we knew we needed to kind of update this plan or come up with a new one to stay current. Next slide, please. So the question is, why create a new plan? You can kind of take PFAS actions in that without a plan. Lots of states do that, but we felt it was very important to create a new plan. And the reasons for that are, since we first discovered PFAS impacted communities in our state back in 2016, addressing PFAS has really been a priority for our communities. And it's definitely reflected in the constant headlines about PFAS in all of our papers. So we wanted to be transparent with the public on actions we'd accomplished in the past, that were in progress, and we're planning to take based on funding that we had available. And a public-facing action plan not only keeps you accountable, but also builds the public trust that you can point to a plan and commits you to a path of action, even though the leadership may change. And this has happened in our department as well. Folks that were involved even just a couple of years ago have since kind of changed roles, but having this action plan, it keeps us kind of moving in the same direction. And we also recognize that successfully addressing PFAS requires a holistic approach that we couldn't accomplish on our own and would need support with other state partners. So having an opportunity for this retreat that we just talked about was extremely important, and for us to be successful to kind of find this holistic plan that would include all the partners needed to be successful. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Kelsey, who's going to talk about our action plan process.
Thanks, David. I'm now going to briefly go through our process for developing our 2024 PFAS action plan. First, a group of folks at CDPHE, including both people in staff level roles and leadership roles, began working to brainstorm potential actions for Colorado's new PFAS action plan in early 2023. When we saw the opportunity to apply for the PFAS retreat hosted by the National Governors Association and the American Association for the Advancement of Science, we wanted to put it in an application focused on furthering our action planning with a broader group of people across multiple state agencies. We knew if our application was selected, it could be a great opportunity to facilitate a dedicated space and time to discuss how we could holistically address PFAS in Colorado while including diverse viewpoints and expertise. Our application was selected, and in June of 2023, we had a PFAS retreat to bring together the Colorado Governor's Office, other state agencies, and external experts to brainstorm and prioritize actions that we knew we could commit to and coordinate on to holistically address PFAS in Colorado. To kick off the retreat, the internal CDPHE team did provide some potential actions that they had previously brainstormed as a starting point for discussion. This was really helpful to the group as a whole, because not all participants are lucky like me and David and get to work on PFAS every single day. Some of them were pretty new to the topic. So it was really helpful for them to have kind of a starting point on potential actions we could take and a better understanding of what other states were doing and what was happening at the federal level. From there, after the retreat, the internal team at CDPHE took all of the actions that were discussed at the retreat and created a draft 2024 PFAS action plan that took into account all of the discussions we had over the few days of the retreat. We shared the draft action plan with all of the participants from the retreat to solicit feedback before moving into our stakeholder engagement process, which Rich is going to go over in more detail later on in this presentation. We ended up posting the final plan in late 2024, and it is available in full on our website. Rich will point you to that later on in the presentation. Next slide, please. So included at the retreat were a variety of representatives from both other state agencies, academic institutions, and federal agencies. We thought through who to invite based on existing partnerships, a desire to build new partnerships in the future, or gaps in expertise, and people we wanted to ensure could fill those gaps through our discussions. Other state agencies besides CDPHE included the Colorado Governor's Office, Colorado Parks and Wildlife, Colorado Energy and Carbon Management Commission, which is our oil and gas regulatory body, the Colorado Division of Oil and Public Safety, Colorado Department of Agriculture, Colorado Attorney General's Office, Colorado Division of Fire Prevention, and the Colorado Department of Transportation. So you can see we had a pretty wide array of people who brought different concerns and perspectives to the conversation. We also have strong relationships with the Colorado School of Mines and the Colorado School of Public Health, and we invited PFAS experts from those institutions, along with scientists from the U.S. Geological Survey, to ensure the latest PFAS science was being considered as we developed our plans. Finally, we also invited outside experts from the Michigan PFAS Action Response Team, who also have a multi-agency approach to addressing PFAS, and they were able to provide some great insights on what has worked and what hasn't worked based on their experiences. Next slide, please. We use the following set of guiding principles based on feedback we've received from the public, advisory groups, and state agencies to develop the action plan and inform the state's overall approach to address PFAS. Our plan is science-driven. We will continue using data for evidence-based decision-making to most effectively allocate resources and adapt our strategy to new information. The plan is intended to be protective. In the absence of finalized federal guidelines, we will continue to make progress towards reducing exposure to protect public health. The plan is to be holistic. This 2024 PFAS action plan takes a holistic approach to increase the scope of impact, timeliness, and comprehensive nature of the response to PFAS contamination. The plan is equitable. We always strive to protect the people of Colorado's inherent right to clean air, land, and water, regardless of socially determined circumstances. And finally, the plan is meant to be transparent. We will continue to provide accurate, actionable, and accessible information on PFAS exposure and health effects. Next slide, please. I will now briefly go over what's included in our action plan, just highlighting a few actions within each objective. Again, you can see our complete action plan on our website. So our overarching action plan goal is to reduce potential health risks posed by PFAS to human health and the environment. We developed 3 objectives to achieve this goal. The first was to identify and minimize Coloradans' exposure to PFAS. A few of the actions included in this objective are to partner with local public health agencies to provide PFAS testing to potentially impacted private wells, and to partner with the Colorado Department of Agriculture to identify and prepare for potential PFAS impacts to Colorado agricultural operations. The second objective was to assess and provide information on PFAS health risks. A few of the actions included in this objective are to evaluate the results of other states' efforts to survey insurance companies for PFAS associated healthcare. And based on those results, conduct a survey of Colorado's insurance providers to better understand the barriers to PFAS blood testing and preventative care associated with PFAS exposure. And then another action within our identifying and providing information on health risks is to determine the cost and value of adding PFAS blood concentrations as a reportable condition, similar to how we have blood lead levels as a reportable condition. And finally, the third objective is to limit the amount of PFAS entering the environment and address known PFAS contamination. A few of the actions included in this objective are to require that any releases of PFOA or PFAS at a facility under a hazardous waste permit or corrective action order be investigated, cleaned up, or otherwise remediated, and to partner with the Colorado Department of Transportation to expand the PFAS take-back program to include firefighting foam containing PFAS from commercial airports. And I will pass it to Rich.
All right, thank you, Kelsey. So I'll wrap us up today by covering sort of our stakeholder engagement efforts, some benefits of our approach, and then the lessons learned. So on the stakeholder engagement end, we worked to reach stakeholders in a variety of ways during the development of the plan. We created an external facing website where we posted information on meetings and notes. That website also had an option to submit written comments via a survey. We held 2 virtual meetings during the creation of the plan to sort of provide progress to the communities and then also receive feedback from them on our plan. And then on top of those, we also held sort of these informal office hours that were focused towards members of disproportionately impacted communities where they could go request more information or provide their own feedback in a little bit of a different setting. We took this feedback from these various events and we summarized it and then shared our responses in our final issuance of the final action plan. There's another document that issued our responses to feedback. And the main piece of feedback that we received throughout this process was that the public said that there's a lack of knowledge or discussion on the progress made towards the goals of the 2019 action plan. And so for the 2024 action plan, we've committed to releasing a biannual newsletter, both highlighting the progress we've made towards these goals. And the first newsletter went out in January and the second one's about to go out in June, and we'll try to keep that cadence going forward. The really interesting part of this feedback was that it wasn't necessarily, people didn't provide us input on the specific objectives in the plan or the actions that we were taking. They really just wanted to be more or less kept in the loop and know where to find the best and most current information on some of this. So next slide, please. So the benefits that we see from this approach was, first of all, is that the plan itself shows a public commitment to action on PFAS. And as David mentioned, the plan is built so that even if priorities shift or personnel change, the plan is the plan and our objectives, we can still keep moving forward through that. And through the process of incorporating a large amount of stakeholders and feedback, we think that this really developed a holistic plan to address PFAS and also allowed for the incorporation of non-agency viewpoints in the completion or the development of the plan. And this, as a follow-on from that, helped facilitate our involvement in other interstate and interagency work groups on PFAS. Like 2 specific examples of that is that we held another tabletop exercise with the Colorado Department of Agriculture, but also included members from the EPA and even the state of New Mexico, focused around a response from PFAS impacts at a farm and sort of how we would go through that response, like a theoretical response to that sort of action. And it's really helped us from the work that I do a lot is our partnership with our DoD and federal facilities. And then on top of that, our academic partners that are also working with them where they're piloting a lot of these PFAS destructive technologies and allow us to sort of learn in the process and get exposure to a lot of these cutting edge technologies. Next slide, please. And lastly, we'll cover our lessons learned. Number 1 is just to be flexible, allow for the ability to incorporate these new tools and information, like as the plan is in development and even within the execution of the plan. David mentioned at the beginning, right, the PFAS landscape is always changing. Sometimes, well, most times month by month. And allowing for the incorporation of these tools really allows for a good plan at the end of the day. On kind of our end, it really highlighted our need for a more robust interagency data sharing and database system. I'm sure other folks on the call know that the data that we take in our hazardous materials division is a little bit different than David might take in the water quality division and Kelsey in her division. But the more that we can bring that data together, the better insights we can gain from it. And we're actually starting on that piece currently. We wanted to seize this momentum around PFAS and hopefully use it as a going forward for other emerging contaminants and hopefully creating a larger sort of emerging contaminants plan from this, but using PFAS as the guide. And the next would be to, we engaged kind of external partners early, like EPI, like other federal partners, understanding what's possible in the development of the plan, getting their input on the plan early and helping to set the stage really helped us create a good plan in the end. And last, but certainly not least, and this is kind of a helpful for a variety, like really in any way, in any of these plans, is that we used an implementation matrix. It's called a RACI, but that helps provide accountability for who's responsible for both the objectives and the sub-objectives. It has responsibilities broken out by by both programs, by divisions, programs, and personnel. And so those change, those can be reevaluated. And as we move through the plan, it'll help us know who's responsible for what points. So next slide. Yeah, and that's all the slides we had for today. So thank you all for your attention for our talk today. Our contact information is listed below. Also, our main PFAS website for CDPHE is at the bottom. You can access our action plan at that link below. But thank you all for your attendance today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rich, Kelsey, and David. Really so helpful to hear kind of that background, a little bit about the planning process, information about what's in the plan, and then some of the kind of lessons learned around stakeholder engagement, how that informed kind of your path forward, collaboration across entities, collaboration across other state agencies, and kind of implementation lessons learned. So really appreciate you sharing all that information. So we do have some time for questions here. And I wanted to maybe kick things off. Maybe just we have questions and discussion. So invite folks who are listening online. I see someone has already been able to put a question into the chat. So thank you. Also, you can feel free to raise your hand and ask a question verbally. And again, we're kind of really wanting to focus in on questions kind of around the Colorado action planning process, lessons learned. I'll kick things off with one question. You mentioned, I think, Kelsey, you may have mentioned this when you were talking about kind of the overarching principles guiding the action plan. But you mentioned that the plan is science driven. That's one of those principles. And I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about how CDPHE used science to inform the strategic priorities in the 2024 action plan. Is there any particular information or resources that you use that you would want to recommend to others as they're thinking about creating or updating their PFAS action plans?
Sure, I can start from my perspective and then have David and Rich chime in. I think, as David mentioned, and our first plan was really focused on drinking water and on AFFF. In our second plan, the 2024 plan, we've really expanded that. And with the latest research showing that dietary factors are likely a big exposure source for a lot of people, our new plan has a lot more emphasis in trying to understand diet. We're expanding our fish consumption program and doing a lot of fish testing. We have a biosolids PFAS testing program. We've really strengthened our partnership with the Colorado Department of Agriculture. So we have a lot of new aspects in the plan related to diet, and that's largely based on that being, one of the top ways that people can be exposed to PFAS. We also, like I mentioned, have very strong partnerships with academic institutions in Colorado. So to expand our understanding of, different sources, in the plan, we specifically put in, we will increase and maintain partnerships with our academic collaborators. And even since then, we have a new study going on with Colorado School of Mines that we've funded to address some specific questions we had around sources in Colorado, like, for example, residential septic systems. And I think that these partnerships really help us, use science to make informed decisions on what should be the priority and how we can communicate that to the public. And like I said, we specifically put in the plan objectives around collaboration with our academic partners and strengthening those partnerships. So, David?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the only thing I'd add is, as far as looking at the latest science, I mean, it's just hugely beneficial to just stay engaged with all of the different national organizations. And a lot of them have these kind of separate PFAS committees where states can share what they're doing. So through that, we're able to talk with a lot of others. We're able to look at a lot of other states that already have action plans to really just kind of see what's possible. And then within our plan, making sure what we have is it's almost a commitment to take action in certain areas and start looking at it, but we don't spec out what that end solution is for some of the things that we're moving forward with. and that was very purposeful, so we can adjust, because we also rely on federal information, and we don't always know when we're going to get that and when something may happen. And so we want to be able to get that latest information and actually kind of adjust if needed within some of these specific actions. So when you go through the plan, it's based on kind of the science that we knew up to that point, but also trying to make sure we weren't limited by that as we move forward. And so this plan is to address kind of the next few years of how we'll address PFAS. I don't know, Rich, if you have anything from your perspective.
Not much to add there. I mean, I think from the data end, like kind of the data sharing that we've done and sort of that we set up at this point, we sort of have some maps, and it's allowed us to kind of bring together the data that water quality has collected and the Division of Environmental Health and Sustainability has collected with some of our others. And those allow like to have the flexibility to address changing levels or, you know, regulatory environment and things like that, but also allows us, it's kind of an interesting way to look at the state from the perspective of all three of us to understand if like is a drinking water impact near, you know, a site that could be impacting it or those kind of things, and allows us to kind of collaborate in a way that's just really, really beneficial.
Great. Thanks so much. I also wanted to just ask Rebecca Eicher from the EPI Center, kind of given your organization's mission in terms of helping to kind of identify and support decision-making by sharing the latest scientific evidence, wanted to check in if you have other resources that you might recommend for folks as they're thinking about how to use science to inform their action planning.
Yeah, great question. And echoing what Kelsey, David, and Rich said, you know, the science changes relatively rapidly, but some trends and patterns are relatively consistent. So the EPICenter has some resources that we created and updated relatively recently, but our webinars are recorded and those are on our website. So I will put those in the chat, as well as some additional resources like the ITRC, which has these really deep technical guides on PFAS. They are updated relatively frequently, but not at a monthly sort of process, right? So you're looking at kind of years before they get updated, but really helpful background, and a lot of them individual fact sheets on topics that states are addressing. Also, the Environmental Council of States has a PFAS page that has some resources for states and topics that are relevant to many states that I'll put in. And then lastly, there is an effort that is called the PFAS Exchange, hosted on the Silent Spring Institute's website. And one of the things that they have shared and are really interested in trying to get into more people's hands are resources for clinicians. So it's a set of resources that are available for medical doctors that people can share to really help medical doctors around the country start to have a better understanding of PFAS and human health impacts. So I will share all of those in the chat, and you should be able to save the chat at the end or copy the resources that you find most relevant.
Great. Thank you. We did have a question come in from one of the members of the audience, Todd Kaiser. And I wanted to ask you all that question. So Todd asks, in terms of stakeholder engagement, how far were you into the planning process before you sought stakeholder engagement around kind of the action planning process? And then relatedly, how did you address stakeholder engagement or input that might not have utilized a data-driven approach?
I can help start with that one. That's a really important question. We gave it a lot of thought with kind of how we went about doing our stakeholder engagement, and because there's multiple ways to do it. You can do it up front and just get ideas to then try to formulate what's possible and create a plan. And And what we ended up doing was waiting until we had a draft plan. So we met with all the various state agencies. We kind of already knew this is the available funding we have, resources from other departments, looked at the whole landscape of kind of what's out there and what others are doing and what's possible, and then kind of came up with a draft plan with all of the other kind of state agencies. And the draft plan is then when we engage stakeholders. So it's like, hey, we've already met with all the state agencies. This is what we think is, a good path forward for how we address PFAS. And then that's when we engage stakeholders. And so we didn't want to open it up to just have a lot of things that we wouldn't be able to kind of achieve based on resources or based on kind of maybe levels or expectations that weren't possible. So we kind of put forth a draft plan and then got feedback. And kind of the second part of the question of just, how did we address kind of the stakeholder engagement where they asked for us not to kind of utilize a data-driven approach. Luckily, we didn't have to deal with that. So the only feedback, which was kind of a shock to us, was really people just wanted information about PFAS. What are you doing? But overall, it seems like everyone was good with the plan forward. So we didn't really have any feedback saying, we want you to do this and not this type thing. So a lot of it was kind of an acceptance of the plan. So we were able to easily move forward with it and then also find ways to just get information out there to them that Rich talked about. I don't know, Kelsey, if you have any other thought? I know you were really engaged as well, kind of with the stakeholder piece of it.
I would just say, like, when you think of the spectrum of community engagement, where it goes from the highest level where you're like, empowering, all the way to the lowest, which is inform, I would say we were kind of aiming to be on the consult. Like, we weren't quite just informing them where we were just like saying, sending out a newsletter or something. We had the opportunity for people to submit comments and ask questions, and we had a public meeting where, the chat was open, anyone could put any comments they had. But like David said, we really didn't, like, people just wanted to ask questions, have us expand on things we were doing. It was just, and then from there we learned, people just want to know what we're doing, and they want to know how, like, what is our progress on the plan, and kind of have us report out on, over the last 6 months we did this, this, and this, and this covers these objectives. So I think people want accountability, and they want the accurate information and to know where to get that.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thanks. And Todd, I see you posted a follow-up comment around what's happening in Delaware. If there's anything else that you wanted to unmute and share, invite you to do that.
I appreciate that. Hi, everyone. Todd Kaiser. My response here, we're engaging in our own strategic planning process now as multiple agencies in Delaware. And one of the questions we have is, at what point is there actually meaningful engagement? And David, you spoke to that. Do we want to present that we have our act together before we seek feedback a little bit? I mean, because honestly, we all do. It's just a matter of at what point do you have a product that's ready to go or halfway ready to go? So I really appreciate Colorado's approach, and I appreciate your presentation today. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, and one thing I'll add, I think, to what Todd was mentioning, at least what we've seen in our state, and I know it's the same for everyone else, but you get, like, in the stakeholder engagement process, you get kind of two extremes. Ones that you're going way above and beyond what you should be doing. There's, going forward as a state and taking these actions that you shouldn't be doing this, you're going to be hurting businesses and that. And then there's also the other extreme where there's no safe level of PFAS anywhere. And so that's part of that is why we wanted to put forth kind of a plan and then invite people for feedback instead of just opening it up to two very kind of different camps that can come in as far as wanting kind of two extremes, and then you having to navigate how do you take them kind of somewhere in the middle path. Though, so that was another consideration for kind of waiting until we had something to pitch forward.
Yeah, and one other thing I would add to the stakeholder engagement strategy is when we had our big meetings, we had like hundreds of people. I think we had like 400 people on these meetings. A lot of these people were from regulated entities. So that's when we decided we needed to give another opportunity and have these smaller group sessions, because for like community members being in that setting, they may not really be comfortable asking their questions. So then we held these small group sessions where we kind of reached out to community groups that, you know, the department has worked with, and we know like there's certain communities who have PFAS in their communities, and offered that as a very informal session where there was only like 10 people, and it was a very different dynamic between those two different stakeholder engagement things. And I think depending on the target audience of who you're trying to reach, I think that can be a great option as well.
Great. Thank you so much. I think it's always helpful to hear a bit more detail about how that stakeholder engagement is done, and appreciate the question. So I think we have time for one more question, and I wanted to ask about funding. You mentioned kind of some of the funding sources that were available as you're kind of starting to develop and implement your plan. But I wanted to ask how, and I know that funding at the retreat or the summit was a big topic of conversation. So I just wanted to ask how you maybe aligned the action plan with funding availability, and if there are any particular sources that the state is using to support your work that you might want to highlight for others in the audience who are thinking about similar challenges.
Yeah, a big thing. We're very fortunate that this happened in our state. And I think part of the reason that it happened was that we actually had an action plan at the time. It was the 2019 action plan, but it just showed that our department is committed to addressing PFAS. And it was something we could point to. And so a state bill passed in 2020 that opened up a PFAS cash fund. And so it collects fees off the movement of fuel in our state. And then we have this that creates the PFAS cash fund that we can then support communities with testing and treatment if they need it, as well as kind of we're able to set up a buyback program, which is kind of the only one I'm aware of that's like this in the country, but we can actually pay our fire departments to take the foam with PFAS out of service until we can collect it and dispose of it. And so those were all made possible through this bill. And you can see what that bill looks like and how it works and what it set up on that main PFAS webpage that we provided a link to. So there's a place with policies and bills. A lot of them have to do with kind of the firefighting foam and preventing releases from that, and some product bans. But there's Senate Bill 2218, and that one, it really created this kind of cash fund that we can use to address PFAS, as well as set up private well testing. So Kelsey's program manages, we're able to get people with private wells, they can sign up for free testing. So they've created a whole program with that, and that's using the same, through the same funding mechanism.
Great, thanks. And is that oh, great, there's the link that Rebecca's put in there into the chat. Okay, there was one more question that just came in from Sinisa Urban in the chat around just asking whether you encountered any issues or disagreements with what should be considered PFAS. Just wondering if anyone has a quick response to that question before we move towards wrap up.
Trying to think, do you have something, Kelsey? Like, this is something we talk about this because states have different definitions, but
we have a definition in that statute that David just mentioned. Honestly, the most times this comes up is related to our PFAS product ban. which we have a PFAS product ban similar to some other states. And David's the lucky one to field most of those questions, but I think that we do have a definition, but that isn't usually, that's more of an, that's not a common question that we get from like the public of how are you defining PFAS. It's more like technical conversations we have amongst ourselves and how to answer questions related to the consumer product ban.
Great. Thanks. Okay. Well, I want to move towards wrap up now, but first, thank you so much to Rich, Kelsey, and David for sharing this information, sharing your lessons learned, responding to questions. We really hope that kind of in being able to kind of giving this opportunity for other states to hear from you all, we're able to kind of amplify the experiences and lessons learned to more states that are facing similar challenges. So thank you very much to you all for your presentation and responses, and to the audience for their questions. So as we're moving towards wrap up, we are going to ask those of you who are participating in today's webinar for input in two ways. First, I'm going to ask Joanna to put up a Mentimeter poll in the screen share here in Zoom. And we are interested in hearing from participants in the webinar today for feedback on kind of first, what other PFAS issues are you wrestling with that might benefit from scientific expertise? So that's the first type of input that we want. We'll ask you for your feedback on this event, specifically through an evaluation survey. So you should see this Mentimeter poll up on the screen. And for those of you who are joining us today, if you wouldn't mind going to menti.com and putting in that code 61048282 again, and responding to this question, what's another PFAS issue you are working on in your state that would benefit from scientific evidence? We're interested in learning, understanding what the needs are that are out there, and that will help to inform our future kind of activities, webinars, information sharing, etc. around PFAS. So replies are anonymous in case you're feeling hesitant to share your responses. And as you're thinking about and hopefully responding to that question, again, wanted to thank the speakers and participants for joining today. We will be circulating a recording to everyone who registered, and when that's available, the recording and the presentation will be posted to the AAAS website. I believe Rebecca had put the link into the chat earlier. Oh, great, see some responses coming in. Thank you all. We do
I'll
have
just interject for 1 second to say, please, we just put the post-event survey in. We're a science-based organization, and so we need science to evaluate our process and how we're doing. So you can contribute by telling us what you thought of today, and we can also take that into account for our upcoming Ohio and Maryland discussions. So don't forget to do the post-event survey. And I will let Maya go back to the Mentimeter.
Yeah, no, thank you, Rebecca. Both input from folks on kind of the other issues and on this event via the link that you put into the chat will be really helpful. We do have those other 2 webinars coming up soon. On April 24th, we'll be hearing from Ohio. We had a summit with the Ohio state government, and that will be focused on sharing kind of results from that event, that retreat around the voluntary program to test for PFAS in private wells. And then on April 30th, we'll be hearing from Maryland and talking about their retreat results that was focused on biosolids and spray irrigation using effluent from wastewater treatment plants. So 2 more dates to highlight for you there, April 24th and April 30th for the next webinars, and hopefully you've registered for those already. Looking at the Mentimeter results, seeing biosolids. So that's a good place to highlight that April 30th webinar. PFAS in gardening, PFAS in confined versus unconfined wells, stormwater runoff, atmospheric deposition, risk communication, how to think about the different sources and of exposure and long-term disposal options. So thank you all for highlighting those. If you're reading through the things that people have flagged, you can go ahead and upvote them if you're thinking about similar things in your state. And then finally, as Rebecca mentioned, please do go ahead and click on the link and provide your feedback on this event through the evaluation survey. With that, that brings us to the end of this webinar. Chris, I know you kicked things off today and just wanted to check in if you had any closing comments as we're wrapping up here.
Nothing specific other than thanks again to the Colorado team for a wonderful presentation. Thank you all for your time, and we look forward to the next couple of installments in this PFAS webinar series. Appreciate your time and hope you have a good afternoon.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Take care.